So what is a large pandemic really like? Well, we haven't got any experience in modern times of a large and deadly pandemic. We've had experience of the flu, but that's not exactly the same because it certainly didn't kill more than 50% of the people it infected. In fact, less than 10% is often a figure that was quoted for the 1918 flu. So all we can do is go back to history. Now here's a painting, and this has been said to show scenes that were pretty typical of the devastation caused by the plague. And let's start in the background. We have ships on fire. We have ships sinking. Why is this? Well, people didn't want these people from abroad coming to their shores. So ships that were probably perfectly innocently engaged on trade were sunk quite deliberately by the people along the coast. You notice I say not by the people, not by the government, because by this time, a few months into the plague, there would have been no real government. People up here in the right, you have people who had caught the plague and didn't wish to suffer the terrible symptoms, often would get someone else to kill them. And here you have this sort of a scene of assisted suicide, practically. And there was some debate as to what to do with the bodies of plague victims. And here we've got what looks like a wheel on top of a post. In fact, that's exactly what it is. And you can see this one's got a body strapped to it. This is a way of disposing of the bodies where the birds come down and eat them. And this was quite common in some parts of Europe. And you have a hanging body on a gibbet, and that was quite a common sight as well. And here in the back you've got a community that has decided to isolate itself. So you can see there's a wall around this building. There's lots of people guarding it to make sure nobody comes in. Wasn't always effective. You have a huge band of people moving from one place to another. Well, if the plague is known to exist in one town, people would move out. Unfortunately, they often brought it with them. Hence the little band of communities protecting their walls. And you have a religious community here, putting their faith in God and carefully isolating themselves from everyone else. But of course, if one of them caught the plague, he got pushed off the wall and down into the river because they don't want it. And you've got scenes of general chaos. I mean, you have a tumbril here, which is a cart full of bodies being driven by a very sickly looking horse, because there is some evidence to show that animals could catch it as well. And everyone looks really emaciated and thin, and this is because food production had obviously broken down. Very difficult to get food. There's a king down here who's been infected, showing that even royalty got it. And there's various scenes of bodies being disposed of. A dog eating a dead body while people are not really worried about it because it's happening all over the place. Down here you have some nobles who are having a feast, and servants who are keeping all of the infected away. And you have a huge pile of dead bodies. And you have people who are being herded, the infected being herded into some sort of containment area. And this is the sort of thing that went on all over Europe. All these ideas were tried, all these things. Nothing really worked because they didn't understand how the plague was spread. So we'll go to a verbal description of what it was like. And here we have the Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the plague as it ravaged the city of Florence in 1348. And you have his description of the symptoms, which are not entirely dissimilar to Ebola with its blood-filled swellings. The symptoms were not the same as in the East, where a gush of blood from the nose was the plain sign of inevitable death. But it began both in men and women with certain swellings in the groin or under the armpit. They grew to the size of a small apple or egg, more or less, and were vulgarly called tumours. Soon after this, the symptoms changed, and black or purple spots appeared on the arms or thighs or any other part of the body, sometimes a few large ones, sometimes many little ones, and this is very like Ebola actually. These spots were a certain sign of death, just as the original tumour had been. Now, how did people react to this? Such fear and fanciful notions took possession of the living that almost all of them adopted the same cruel policy, which was to entirely avoid the sick and everything belonging to them. Well, actually I would call that sensible. By so doing, each one thought he would secure his own safety. The trouble is that the pneumonic version of the plague, it was airborne, so that didn't work. Some thought that moderate living would preserve them from the epidemic. They formed small communities, living entirely separately from everyone else. They shut themselves up in houses where there were no sick, eating the finest food, drinking the very best wine, avoiding all excess, allowing no news or discussion of death, and passing the time in music and such like pleasures. This is like the rich people in that painting. Others thought just the opposite. They thought a sure cure was to drink and be merry, go around singing and amusing themselves, satisfying every appetite they could. And here we have the beginning of social breakdown. In this suffering and misery of our city, the authority of human and divine laws almost disappeared, for like other men, the ministers and the executors of the laws, i.e. the police, were all dead or sick or shut up with their families, so that no duties were carried out. Every man was therefore able to do as he pleased. This hints at looting and property theft on a huge scale, which we know took place. And here we have a description of what it was like. People went around carrying flowers or scented herbs or perfumes in their hands, in the belief that it was an excellent thing to comfort the brain with such odours, for the whole air was infected with the smell of dead bodies, of sick persons, and of medicines. And remember, some of the primitive medicines were really, really smelly. The breakdown of social order. One citizen avoided another, hardly any neighbour troubled about others, relatives never or hardly ever visited each other. Moreover, such terror was struck into the hearts of men and women by this calamity, that brother abandoned brother, and the uncle his nephew, and the sister her brother, and very often the wife her husband. What is even worse, and nearly incredible, is that fathers and mothers refused to see and tend their children as if they had not been theirs. And this is hardly surprising if you think about it, and it's not necessarily cruel, because let's say your parents have the plague and they know that if they come and they do the normal things they do for you, then they're going to pass it on for you. They're not going to want to do that. So here we have, thus a multitude of sick men and women were left without any care, except from the charity of friends, but these were few, or the greed of servants, although not many of these could be had even for high wages. And so you can see the situation as the level of sickness grows. If you're sick, you're going to be left on your own. You're going to find it very difficult, and even if you wouldn't have died of the illness, you're probably going to die anyway, of dehydration because you can't get drinking water, or of lack of food, starvation. Beautiful and noble women, when they fell sick, did not scruple to take a young or old manservant, whoever he might be, and with no sort of shame expose every part of their bodies to these men, as if they had been women, for they were compelled by the necessity of their sickness to do so. In other words, women would resort to the oldest ploy that they have in order to keep someone around who's going to look after them. They would prostitute themselves. And mass burials. The plight of the lower and most of the middle classes was even more pitiful to behold. Now, the people he's been talking about up till now are the rich. Most of the lower and middle classes remained in their houses either through poverty or in hopes of safety, and fell sick by the thousands. Since they received no care and attention, almost all of them died. Many of them ended their lives in the streets, both at night and during the day. Many others who died in their houses were only known to be dead because the neighbours smelled their decaying bodies. Dead bodies filled every corner. Most of them were treated in the same manner by the survivors, who were more concerned to get rid of their rotting bodies than moved by charity towards the dead. Such was the multitude of corpses brought to the churches every day and almost every hour that there was not enough consecrated ground to give them burial, especially since they wanted to bury each person in the family grave. Although the cemeteries were full, they were forced to dig huge trenches where they buried the bodies by the hundreds. Here they stowed them away like bales in the hold of a ship, and covered them with a little earth until the whole trench was full. Now, I'm going to tell you that I don't think if Ebola really took hold now, that our society would be very much different from this. And there's already signs that this is so, because if we look at the Texas outbreak in Dallas, you can see that there were medical workers who didn't want anything to do with that man, and they were justified because the medical workers that did, some of them fell ill with Ebola. There was recently a trial in London where they got some actors to pretend to be Ebola victims, and they got taken into hospitals, and they caused panic, and people were refusing to treat them, people were refusing to admit them, people were refusing to have anything to do with them. And these were trained medical professionals, and this is now, today. And this is only a few people. Imagine what it would be like if there were hundreds or thousands or, God forbid, millions of people infected. It would be precisely the same as it was in 1348. You would have people running away, you would have people locking themselves in their house and not coming out, assuming they had the supplies to do so. And doubtless you would have women prostituting themselves to actually have someone to look after them. You would have men doing the same. A lot more gay people now today, obviously. You would have animals eating the dead in the street. Lots of foxes about in the UK since they put in the hunting ban. So, and the thing about Ebola, how do we know how it spreads? We don't. So the foxes could very well spread the disease. It would just be chaos. So what I'm going to say is that effectively, in the matter of large pandemics, I do not believe we have come very far since 1348. Well, I hope this has been an eye-opener for you, and if you found it useful, please like, subscribe, and of course share the video. Thank you very much.